If your RV's fridge is turning on but not cooling, then there are 4 things that might be your problem, and luckily there are 4 things that almost anyone can check for themselves without any special tools or know-how. If you don't know me, hi, hello, my name is Emily. I am a certified RV repair tech, and this is RV Repairwoman. So there are 4 things that any RV fridge needs in order to cool. It needs to be level, it needs super good ventilation, it needs to not have a leak in its cooling unit, and it needs a heat source. These are the first 4 things that any tech is going to check when they come out to look at your fridge. So let's start with level. This is probably the easiest. These fridges want to be within 3 degrees of level side to side and within 5 degrees front to back. This is a level of level that you will probably feel on your own. If you're more than 3 degrees out of level this way, you will probably feel it. But it's a good thing to check if you haven't leveled your RV in a minute. Maybe it started sagging on one side. Where this tends to come into play more for me as a tech are people parking their RVs on their pitched driveways and then trying to turn on the fridge to get it cool for like a weekend getaway, and then the fridge won't get down to temp. Luckily, that's a super easy thing to diagnose. Usually I just walk up to that call and go, I see your problem right there. The reason that these fridges want to be level is because if you look in the back of your fridge, you can see that there's these zigzagging pipes down the side. The refrigerant in your RV's fridge is actually going to move through those pipes via gravity. So if you are wildly out of level, then the refrigerant isn't going to move through the pipes at the rate that it was designed to. And this can fundamentally keep the fridge from cooling. But once you've confirmed that your fridge is level, the next thing that you're going to look for is the ventilation going on behind your fridge. Part of what makes these absorption style fridges so different from a traditional residential style fridge is that they are really dependent on outside air to help keep them cool. So air is actually supposed to be sucked in through this bottom vent, up along the back of the fridge, and then out at a vent on the top. If your fridge is in a slide, that upper vent will be on the side of the slide. If your fridge is not in a slide, then that vent will be on your roof. When we talk about checking the ventilation on these fridges, we're really looking to see that air can move along the back of the fridge and nowhere else. So the first thing you're going to look for is if there is any gap along the side of the fridge. There should be literally 0 tolerance, 0 clearance between the fridge and either side wall. If there is any gap here, you're going to want to fill it with insulation of some sort. The next thing that you're going to look for is the gap between the back of your fridge and the back wall of the RV. That gap should be no more than 1 inch. This is because air is really lazy. We want to give it no choice but to move along the back of the fridge. Some fridges will build baffles or like little planes to help direct the air. So if you look on this fridge, it actually has a small piece of wood here that is forcing the air to move along the back of the fridge. And this gap from this piece of wood to the back of the fridge is only about 1 inch. If this piece of wood wasn't here, then this fridge most likely would not get down to temperature. If the gap between the back of your fridge and this wall of the RV is significantly more than 1 inch, there's a handful of things that you can do to help. First, you could add a piece of wood, like the one that this fridge has, to just help direct the air along the back of the fridge. You could also look into making what's called a baffle box and attaching it to this back wall, just like the inside of this back wall. I've seen people make this box out of Luan, or even just getting some sheet insulation from like Lowe's or Home Depot and just gluing it to this back wall just to take up space. In order to get that foam insulation or that box that you've made in there, you will need to remove the fridge just in order to get access to that wall, but it can be worth that whole project if it helps your fridge get down to temperature. Along a similar vein, if your fridge is in a slide, there should be another piece of wood at the top of your fridge that's directing the air out. There should actually be like an air pocket with some insulation in it on top of your fridge, and that piece of wood is going to make sure that the air goes out and doesn't get stuck on top of your fridge. If all of a sudden you struggle to get your freezer to temp, I would recommend looking to see if that piece of wood at the top might have fallen or have been moved in some way. But while we're talking about ventilation, let's also talk about the sneaky best kept secret about these fridges that they don't tell you at the dealership. The max temperature that these absorption style fridges were designed to work in is 85 degrees. Meaning that if it is hotter than 85 degrees outside, you are technically outside of the design specifications for these fridges. This is the bane of my existence as a tech that is based in Las Vegas. What this can mean is that if it is hotter than 85 degrees outside and your fridge is struggling to get to temperature, it may be that the fridge is working exactly as it was designed to, and it's just too hot outside for the fridge. Because these fridges need all of that air moving along the back of them to help them get cool, they're really dependent on the outside temperature. So if you're in Las Vegas and it's over 100 degrees outside and your fridge worked all spring and winter long, and right now it is cooling but not quite making it to temperature, it may just be that you're outside of the design specs for these fridges. There are a handful of things that you can do to help, but it's really like asking a fish to do well on land. It's just not what these fridges were designed to do. If your fridge is cooling, but just not quite getting to temperature, there are a handful of things that you can do to help your fridge out in the ventilation department. The first of which is to look into getting some fans. They make these little kits, they look like computer fans, that you can mount right about here. And they're usually just like a 2-wire install. They're super easy. You can definitely do this. And you just need to make sure that you orient them so they are sucking air in at the bottom and out at the top. And this is going to help just pull in air and help push air through this system. I've also seen some people, if you are stationary in one place for a long period of time, just get like a box fan and build a little platform to then put a box fan right here and just shove as much air as possible into this compartment. I will say I have seen some people try to remove this cover in order to try to help more air get in here, and I don't usually recommend it just because that can make this compartment so dirty, especially here in Las Vegas where we get a lot of dust and a lot of wind. And if you start getting enough muck and grime in here, it can keep your wires from making full connections. It can get into the propane igniter in here and keep it from igniting. So as much as we want air to come in, I do recommend keeping this cover on here. I've taken it off just for demonstration purposes, but that is going to help keep some of that dust out. And then finally, if you are also in a place that is stationary and you're going to be there a long time, I have also seen people do like full covers on the side of their RV that has a fridge just to try to give it some shade. Again, because these fridges are so dependent on what temperature it is outside, just getting some shade for this side of the RV can help a lot. Okay, so we've talked about being level and we've talked about ventilation. The next thing that you're going to look for, if you think both of those things are fine, is whether or not your fridge has a refrigerant leak. What do we mean by a refrigerant leak? Well, inside of your cooling unit, which is basically the whole back guts of your fridge, are these pipes that are full of refrigerant. Your fridge is a pressurized, hermetically sealed system, meaning there should be no way for refrigerant to get out. And if it has made it out, that could be the reason that your fridge isn't cooling. Luckily, to perform this test, you don't need any special tools. You just need all the parts that your mama gave you. You're just gonna open up this back compartment and perform the see, smell, hear test. I recommend, if your fridge has one, removing this metal panel right here. It's usually just attached with a couple screws. Pop that bad boy off and then look down back here. You are looking for a yellow dye. This is a dye that they put inside of the refrigerant to help look for leaks. And usually if you have a leak, right down here is where it's going to happen. If you see that yellow dye, you can stop your diagnosis right there. You have a refrigerant leak. The other two signs of a refrigerant leak is we're going to smell for ammonia. I get calls for this quite often. If you get a really strong ammonia smell coming either from this bottom compartment or from inside and you haven't cleaned your fridge with ammonia cleaner recently, really good sign you have a refrigerant leak. And then the other part of the see, smell, hear test is to listen for a gurgling noise. These units, when they're running, especially on electric, should be near silent. So if you are hearing like a babbling brook noise coming from the back of your fridge, real good sign that you have a refrigerant leak. If you decide that you have a refrigerant leak, you're really looking at two options. You can either replace the cooling unit or replace the entire fridge itself. There are a very, very small number of techs in the country that can fix cooling units properly. I know out there you can find these recharge kits for these fridges, and I really, really do not recommend you use them, or let a tech use one on your fridge. I usually describe this situation like a bucket of water with a hole in it. Recharging your fridge or just putting more refrigerant in is just like pouring more water into a bucket with a hole. Yes, it'll probably solve the problem for a really short amount of time, but pretty soon the refrigerant is going to get out of whatever hole it got out of in the first place. As I said, there are a very small number of techs in the country that do these kind of repairs properly. It usually involves draining the cooling unit of the rest of the refrigerant in it, locating whatever hole let the refrigerant out, welding that hole up properly, and then refilling the cooling unit with the right mixture of chemicals so that way it will cool again. None of those steps are a simple process, and that's why there's so few techs that do this kind of work. I don't. So look around, maybe there's someone in your area that does this kind of work, but I'm gonna say like 95% of the time, you're looking at replacing the cooling unit or replacing the fridge. And I know a lot of people are like,
okay, which one's cheaper?
It really depends from scenario to scenario. Replacing the cooling unit is usually cheaper on parts, but more expensive on labor because you still have to pull the whole fridge out in order to put a new cooling unit in. But this is a topic for another day. Today, we're concentrating on why this fridge isn't cooling. So if you've confirmed that your fridge is level, it looks like it has good ventilation, and you've passed the see, smell, hear test, then the final thing that we're going to look for is whether or not this tube back here on your fridge is getting hot. So when you look at your back of your fridge, remember you might need to remove this one piece of metal in order to see this tube more clearly, but you can usually touch him without having to remove this piece of metal. So just really carefully, because it might be hot, just go ahead and put your hand, just a real quick tap. Is it getting hot? Not just warm, hot. This tube is usually on the right, but on some models they put it on the left just to trip you up. If that tube is not getting hot, that's actually a really good sign that whatever is keeping your fridge from cooling is probably a part that is pretty cheap and easy to change out. It's not that you have a systemic like cooling unit problem, you probably just have like one small part, either like your circuit board or one of the safety mechanisms that you need to either reset or replace. That tube being cold, real good sign. We love to see it, just because it's usually a pretty easy problem to solve. If you would like, you can head on over to rvrepairwoman.com/fridges, where I have a course that costs less than what any tech is going to charge you to come out and look at your fridge. And instead, I'll walk you through step by step how to test every single part of the back of your fridge, from the circuit board to any safety mechanisms that might be back here to what the heck's going on with that propane igniter. I'll walk you through step by step, and by the end you're going to feel like a total pro. Like I said, the whole thing costs less than what any tech out there is going to charge you for a call. So rvrepairwoman.com/fridges, go check that out. If for whatever reason that tube is getting hot, like hot, you don't want to touch it, and your fridge still isn't cooling, that is another sign that you have a problem with your cooling unit. This is probably a place where I would call a tech to double check your diagnosis, because we're getting into some finicky territory here, but I'm gonna take a wild guess and say you probably have a blockage in your fridge, which is also not a problem that's really easy to solve, and you're probably looking at replacing the cooling unit, but this is probably a place where you want a tech to come in and give you a second opinion. Basically, in order for your fridge to work, it's like a series of chemical and phase changes, and the very first step is for that tube to get hot. So if that tube isn't getting hot, nothing's gonna happen. But if that tube is getting hot and it's still not cooling, it means your problem is in one of those phase changes or chemical reactions, and those aren't really something that we can control or fix. We're on to the magic part of the back of your fridge. But those are the four main things that you're gonna look for. Is your fridge level? Does it have good ventilation? Does it have a refrigerant leak? And does it have a heat source? Basically, is that tube getting hot? If your fridge is unlevel, has bad ventilation, has a cooling unit leak, or that tube isn't getting hot, then that's the reason why your fridge isn't working. If you found this video helpful, please consider sharing it with a friend. I know that RV techs try to make this whole RV repair thing seem really complicated, and I'm really just trying to be out here to show anyone can do a lot of this stuff, and you can have control over your whole RV. You got this.